Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The privilege is now mine, Mr. Speaker, to offer my contributions to this year's budget debate. And I want to begin by extending to my brother, the distinguished Minister of Finance, and his competent team, my warmest congratulations for all the hard work they would have endured in compiling one of the greatest budgets in our country's history. Mr. Speaker, I have been here for the past few days listening to these debates, and there have been highs and there have been lows. Today, Mr. Speaker, we were visited with many lows. We have responsibilities in this House to the people of our country. All of us, we were elected, Mr. Speaker. And we have to be careful what we say, how we say it, and the way that we conduct ourselves. It appears as though, Mr. Speaker, that we are oblivious of those responsibilities. I listened to the Honorable Member, Mr. Roysdale Ford, this afternoon, an honorable member that I have known for half of my life. And what I saw there transformed was a completely different human being. I saw the hate, I saw the venom, I saw the vituperation, I saw the anger. Why? Why? I listened to the personal attacks. Why? Is it that we are vacuous? Is it that we are inefficient? Is it that we are incompetent? So we have to supplement that with hate and diatribe and anger. I pity those who have to seek refuge in those facilities, Mr. Speaker. But he has placed on the record a few comments that I feel compelled that I must respond to. Mr. Speaker, I am very cognizant of the fact that I stand here speaking on behalf of the great party of Dr. Chedi Jagan. That I am the chief legal officer of this land. That I am the Attorney General of this country. That I am the principal legal advisor of the government of Guyana. I am cognizant of those responsibilities. But I will never allow disrespect to be taking place against me or any of my colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I am a Queen's College old boy. And let me say proudly that a Queen's College old boy will never borrow notes from a St. Rose's student. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, I was never short of toilet paper in the law school. So I don't understand how an honorable member can stand there with a straight face and fabricate a story that I borrow notes from them. You have to be steeping to a level that is unspeakable to resort to that. And I can say much more. Since he has taken the debate to the law school, I can speak to the unspeakable violence which was meted out to a female student in that school that caused threatened suspension from that law school. I can speak about that. The honorable member, Mr. Datidin, is here. He can testify to what I'm saying. But I will not go into those details. I will not, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member spoke about retro. We are a petro republic, an unlawful petro republic. Mr. Speaker, long before we became involved, long before we became a petroleum producer, the honorable member was a major player in the oil and gas sector. The GRA has the wrong records. And he comes here and speak about an unlawful petro republic. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member has invoked that old hackney argument, that discredited diatribe about extrajudicial killing. A few years ago, the Stabrook News did an article which outlined all the persons whom they were claimed were extrajudicially killed. And on that list, Mr. Speaker, were policemen, were innocent people who were died for different causes, but they were put on a list, and they bandied that list about as though arguing that it is extrajudicial killing. I thought that they would have graduated from such ignorance, but here again, it's fresh before us to the mouth of the honorable member Ford. And Mr. Speaker, what is his logic? The mental bill coming for you, relax. Mr. Speaker, what is he calling extrajudicial killing? Apparently, any person who died at the hands of the police is extrajudicial killing, and by some somersault of logic, the government is responsible. Mr. Speaker, anywhere in the world you have police excesses. No one can dispute that. But a government is not responsible for that. Mr. Speaker, while he was speaking, I called the members of the police force, and they provided me with the statistics of the persons who died in the police force from May 2015 to March 2020. 41 Guyanese died in the police force while you were at the hands of the police force while you were in government. Did any one of us accuse you of extrajudicial killing? There were two persons, I have their name here, Lal Bachchan. He was killed in Saudi Lockup on the 1st of July 2019. Then Kalicharan Sewak, he was killed in Sparendam Lockup on the 28th of January 2019. I represented their family. I went to the High Court and I sued the Attorney General for compensation. I didn't jump on a housetop and try to make political mileage and treat their tragedy like a political football. I did what the law said. I never accused them of extrajudicial killing. That is how responsible politicians and leaders behave. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member spoke about attack of the rule of law when the PPP is in government. And almost all of them, all of the honorable members, as they take the podium, they describe this government as installed. That implying that we are here unlawfully. Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Attorney General, again, it is my duty to traverse, if not verbatim, seriatim, to those false narratives for the purpose of correcting the record. Mr. Speaker, they spent 2 decades in opposition. And as soon as they returned to government in 2015, the people gave them a chance. The people felt that they may have changed because they came from a history of rigging elections, killing Walter Rodney, and taking away the rights and freedoms of the people of this country. In 2015, the people baptized them and gave them another opportunity.
Honorable Attorney General, they, the honorable members, and is the Honorable Deputy Speaker included?
Mr. Speaker, where Dr. Anthony, we really have to get this mental health bill quickly. Mr. Speaker, you had a litany of abrogation of the Constitution and violations of the rule of law. And I've made some notes. The President himself, Mr. Granger, led from the front, confiscating rice lands of farmers in Region 5, seizing the Red House from the Cherry Jagan Research Institute in the face of a 999-year lease, the Attorney General threatening to kill a judge in open court, the President directing the Police Service Commission and the Public Service Commission to halt promotions in violation of the Constitution, the President threatening the Chairman of the Public Service Commission, who was a member of the Judicial Service Commission, to resign or there will be blood on the carpet, Walter Lawrence announcing that they will only hire PNC members, the President unilaterally appointing the Chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, the President and Cabinet refusing to resign after no confidence motion was passed against them in the National Assembly, and they refused to hold elections within 3 months as directed by the Constitution. And then they remained in office constitutionally for over a year, illegally plundering the Treasury. Mr. Speaker, and I take a break. I just take a pause there because I have another litany. And they are accusing us. Imagine. This thing is being streamed live on television. Guyana endured this. The people of Guyana lived through this. And these honorable members are coming here with a straight face and accuse us of violation of the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, then the elections came. On March 2nd, 2020, election day was incident-free. At the end of the day, they claimed that they won the elections. The Carter Center, the European Union, the Commonwealth, the Organization of American States, the Caribbean Community, the entire diplomatic community, the Bar Association, the Private Sector Commission, and numerous other local bodies observed those elections and certified them to be free, fair, and credible. It was when the count was completed and when they realized that they lost that all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose. For 5 long months, the nation stood still. And with the region and the world watched in anguish, agony, and trepidation as attempts after attempts were being made to rig those election results. Guyanese condemned them. Every major organization in Guyana condemned their actions. The diplomatic community condemned their actions. Every major organization in this hemisphere condemned their actions. 100 governments across the globe condemned their actions. Yet they persisted with their fraudulent designs. They tried, Mr. Speaker, with Mingo, and they failed. They tried with Yolita Moore, they failed. They tried with the recount, they failed. They tried with the CARICOM high-level team that observed the recount, they failed. They tried with Lowenfield, they failed. They tried with Messenger Jones, they failed. They tried with Eslyn David, they failed. They tried with the Caribbean Court of Justice, they failed. And for 5 months the world heard the mumbling, incoherent submissions of the Honorable Mr. Ford. And he wants people to believe that I borrowed his notes? Oh my God! Mr. Speaker, in the end, the CCJ interrogated their allegations, the highest court in this country, and pronounced against it. In the end, as required by the Constitution, the chairperson of the Elections Commission declared the results as per the ballots counted and declared Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali as the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, during that 5 months, they were so desperate, they became so degenerate that they went to 7 Ponds to Comrade Leader Tomb, and they bend on their knees and they beg Comrade Leader, oh Comrade Leader, save us, Comrade Leader, save us. The madness has not stopped. The madness has not stopped. Oh Kabaka, that is why we need a mental health bill. Mr. Speaker,
honorable members are shouting, they're shouting, please.
the history of the Guyanese people is a history of struggle for a better life, starting with the arrival of our Amerindian brothers and sisters, to slavery and then indentureship, colonialism, political dictatorship to current time. The life of a majority of Guyanese was one engulfed in poverty, a battle for freedom and justice, and the yearning for a better tomorrow. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say that that tomorrow is here. The foundation and framework of which is contained in Budget 2022. This generation is blessed to be alive during this period. I feel blessed indeed. We are all blessed, not only to be alive during this period, but to participate in this historic process and be part of this historic budget. Mr. Speaker, despite the pessimistic cacophony emanating from the other side, sensible Guyanese recognize that this budget creates the foundation and structure upon which the edifice of modern Guyana will be constructed. It is a budget that reflects our newfound wealth and envious status as one of the largest oil-producing nations in this hemisphere, though only in its embryonic stages. We will be recorded on the positive side of history, Mr. Speaker. Future generations will salute our contributions in this budget, Mr. Speaker. The aggregate budgeted sum of a mammoth $552 billion constitute by far the largest financial injection ever in the Guyanese economy. I have said elsewhere, it is like injecting a racehorse with a huge dose of steroid before the hay race begins. Without the gigantic spin-off benefits destined to flow from this budget, the mere expenditure of this massive sum will invigorate every corner of this nation with a level of commercial, economic, and social activity never witnessed before. I hear the vacuous argument that this budget lacks job creation. Mr. Speaker, the real question is, do we have the capacity to meet the demands of the tens of thousands of jobs that are likely to be created by the mere expenditure of the monies in this budget? Do we have the capacity to access the construction and building materials that will be required for the successful execution of this budget? Do we have the level of skilled personnel, the type of equipment, plant and machinery and requisite skill set that will be needed for the transformational projects embraced by this budget? These are the pertinent questions that right-thinking Guyanese are asking. And these relate not only to government spending, Mr. Speaker. They relate only to government spending. They do not include the explosion that will take place in the private sector. For example, the multiple branded hotels that are already under construction and the several more which will be constructed this year. These are fundamental issues that we in the government have to grapple with and find solutions for. So we have to spend our energy and time engaging our people and partners overseas to advance the developmental agenda of our country, while those on the other side are battling to select a leader, while they preach doom, racism, and sow the seeds of discord and unity. Right there, Mr. Speaker, lies the difference between the two sides. They don't even have a leader. The honorable member, Mr. Roysdale Ford, spoke about the lack of agreement to appoint a chancellor. But with whom would our president agree? There is no opposition leader. What he omitted to say is that for 5 years, while his government was in power, not a single attempt was made to enlist the then opposition leader in any engagement to broker an agreement. In fact, what they were trying to do was to import from the Caribbean somebody that they wanted to impose as chancellor so as to demote the current incumbent and to defeat the Chief Justice. That is what they wanted to do, to pervert the judiciary as well after perverting the political system. Mr. Speaker, on this side we work and we build. On that side they criticize and they destroy. However, it is a burden which we will proudly bear. The historical truth is, Mr. Speaker, from 1950 to now, is that whenever the PPP is in government, there is economic development, social progress, and the rule of law. And when the PPP is out of government, there is economic stagnation, social decay, and authoritarianism. Mr. Speaker, to demonstrate my point, after 28 years of PNC misrule, we were a bankrupt economy. The 1991 budget was a mere 29.4 billion Guyana dollars. Our total foreign debt was 2.1 billion United States dollars. Our debt repayment rate was 120% of our GDP. The entire infrastructure of our country was destroyed. That is what we inherited when they left government in 1992. Mr. Speaker, just quickly ahead, when I entered this parliament in 2006, the national budget was 102 billion Guyana dollars. In 2022, this year, 101 billion is allocated for infrastructure alone. That is how we have grown this economy, and that is how we have grown this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a lot has been said about our Sovereign Wealth Fund and the National Natural Resource Fund Act. And as I was preparing for this budget speech, I stumbled upon an article written, an interview done with a gentleman by the name of Andrew Bauer. Let me read who Andrew Bauer is. Andrew Bauer, Mr. Speaker, is one of the most reputable academic and consultant in the area of oil and gas across this globe. He advises on the G8 summit. He advises on the G20 summits. He advises the governments of Lebanon, Libya, Ghana, Mexico, Mongolia, Uganda, Vietnam, and Senegal. And Mr. Speaker, he spoke on our Natural Resources Fund Bill, Act. He described the one before its predecessor as haphazard. I have the word here on quote, haphazard. And this is what he said of our bill. It is so detailed and innovative, and it will really help Guyana not invest in some of the crazy derivative instrument or art or commodities or whatever that lot of the funds around the world speculate in. The Guyanese fund will not be allowed to do that. There is also a very high degree of transparency in the fund. All of the assets in the fund will be made publicly available through annual reports and financial statements. I continue. This is not Honorable Member Sherrod Duncan speaking. This is Andrew Bauer, a world-known expert. This is what he says, I continue. Guyana is already a resource-rich country, but it will be even more resource-rich. And the huge amount of foreign currency that is going to come into the economy and is already starting to come into the economy will have some important economic impact. Clearly, Guyana needed a fund. It made sense to create a fund to establish to stabilize fiscal expenditures and to smooth spending over a longer period of time, just than when the oil money is collected. Mr. Speaker, this is one of the greatest minds trained in the area of oil and gas management, paying a tribute to our Natural Resource Fund Act. I thought that I would put that on the record because of the distortion that has come from the other side. Mr. Speaker, much has been said about the withdrawal of monies from our Sovereign Wealth Fund. That money belongs to the people of Guyana. 126 billion will be withdrawn from the fund this year. Every cent is reflected in this budget to be spent on and for the people of Guyana, and we have no apologies for that. Mr. Speaker, every single cent of that money will be deposited in the consolidated fund and appropriated in this National Assembly before you. Every single cent will be interrogated and explained in the Committee of Supply, which will be streamed live. Every single Guyanese and indeed the world will view those proceedings and will hear how the money will be spent. That should immediately halt the baseless and reckless allegations of thievery and corruption. Mr. Speaker, education and health, two of the most people-centered sectors in this country, are to receive nearly $80 billion each. These two allocations alone constitute more than $36 billion that will be withdrawn from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Two sectors alone will draw from that fund $36 billion more. Who will benefit from these two sectors, if not every single Guyanese and our students? Yet you hear from the hopeless bunch of honorable members on that side the recurring rhetoric that the budget produces nothing for the Guyanese people. Mr. Speaker, I heard the disgusting assertion that this government is salivating at the oil money. This statement must come from the mind of a come to see, never see. We on this side are not so disposed. We on this side are not so disposed. Ironically, this is the very bunch that eat out $2 billion of food in 1 year, and they talk about salivating. Mr. Speaker, though this point has been repeatedly made, I must emphasize that despite its magnitude, this budget imposes no new taxes. On the contrary, not only does it reverse tax imposed by APNU AFC, but it confers a regime of liberal tax concessions for the ordinary citizens as well as those in the commercial sector. That, Mr. Speaker, is prudent fiscal management. Mr. Speaker, we were able to move our revenue collection from about $160 billion in 2016 to $255 billion in 2021 without any new taxes, largely because of growth in economic activities. The economy is scheduled to grow in 2022 by nearly 50%, which will rank us among the highest growth rates in the world. The non-oil sector is scheduled to grow by some 7%. This will surpass the growth rate in the entire Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, we heard about trickle-down economics from the other side. Well, this is trickle-over economics. From the oil sector, we are trickling it over to the other sectors so that every sector of the country can benefit from the oil money. That is prudent fiscal management. Mr. Speaker, in short, this budget lays a solid foundation for a modern Guyana. I will not spend much time replying to the rambling from the other side. Their track record in government is well known. Their style of politics is well known. Their criticisms and pessimisms are expected. Recall when we were building the Guyana Stadium, Mr. Speaker, at Providence, they labeled it a white elephant. When we were building the Borbees Bridge, they said it was a waste of money. They were opposed to the Marriott Hotel, labeling it a bastion of corruption. When they got into government, it was not enough for them to wine and dine. They killed the Myra Falls project. They killed the specialty hospital. And this was while they were in opposition. While they were in opposition, they were destructive. In government, they built nothing of worth. But they squandered, discriminated, destroyed the productive sectors, and caused over 30,000 Guyanese to lose their jobs while they trampled upon the Constitution. From their presentations in this House, Mr. Speaker, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. One errata, Mr. Speaker, they build a roundabout. And as the Honorable Member, Mr. Dattadin said, that was built wrong. They got a circle wrong. A circle, all they got to do is draw a round circle. That they got wrong. Mr. Speaker, I now move to the legal sector. Our government recognizes that there cannot be economic development nor social progress in the absence of the rule of law, constitutional compliance, and an independent and efficient judiciary. Law and order are the twin pillars upon which modern civilization rests. Mr. Speaker, the judiciary has received an allocation of $3.5 billion in the 2022 budget. Mr. Speaker, starting from the year 2021, we have, as you know, partnered with the judiciary in the establishment of 28 virtual courts right across the prison centers of our country, so that we don't have to take prisoners during this pandemic to the various magistrates' court. They go into those virtual courts and they have their cases heard. That was a $200 million investment. Mr. Speaker, yes, sir.
Honorable.
Sir, I ask kindly that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of Education. Honorable Attorney General, you have 5 minutes to continue and conclude.
Mr. Speaker, the Madhya Magistrates Court will be completed this year. The Port Kaituma Magistrates Court will be completed this year. The Mabaruma Magistrates Court will be concluded this year. The Vigilance Magistrates Court will be concluded this year. The extension of the Court of Appeal building in Kingston will complete next year. The rewiring of the Supreme Court Registry at Essequibo will complete this year. Also this year, Mr. Speaker, we are completing phase 2 of the Bartica Magistrates Court to build parking place, storage bond and a waiting area for members of the public. We will also complete the Madhya Magistrates Court. We will begin the construction of the Kovan John Magistrates Court, the Maikoni Magistrates Court, the extension of a bailiff bond, the construction of storage bonds at Diamond. We will also begin the construction of a magistrates court at Timeri with living quarters, a magistrates court at Friendship, a magistrate court at Anna Regina, and we will build a storage bond also at Leonora Magistrates Court. Mr. Speaker, this year also the judiciary will invest some 1.5 million US in accessing an e-litigation program that will help them to manage litigation in the system. Mr. Speaker, our legislative agenda for 2022, expectedly, new developmental trajectory in which our nation is heading will require a new and modern statutory foundation. Mr. Speaker, we have in this regard a packed legislative agenda for this year. We already have in the Select Committee the Narcotics Amendment Bill. We have a hire purchase bill in the Select Committee. In the pipeline are juvenile justice, evidence, suicide prevention, border patrol, wills, restorative justice, combating of trafficking in person, a bail bill, condominium bill, mental health bill, leave with pay bill, electronic communication transaction bill, anti-dumping bill, engineers bill, securities bill, Public Service Appellate Tribunal Amendment Bill, National Intelligence Security Agency Bill, Representation of the People Act Bill, National Registration Amendment Bill, Election Laws Amendment Bill, Surveillance Devices Bill, an Arbitration Bill, a Hemp Bill, a Public Health Bill, a Medical Practitioners Amendment Bill, Nurses and Midwives Bill, Solid Waste Management Amendment Bill, a Foreign Judgment Reciprocal Enforcement Bill, a Firearms Bill, a Domestic Violence Bill, Radiant Safety and Protection Bill, legislative amendments to our laws to allow for judge-alone trials, Mr. Speaker, and many, many more. We have, of course, mental health is top on our priority, top on the agenda. Mr. Speaker, we also have the Law Reform Commission that will come on. This year will be its first year in force, and we expect, Mr. Speaker, to get from that agency some recommendations for law reform. Mr. Speaker, the Deeds and Commercial Registry Authority falls under the administration, or rather the supervisory authority of the Ministry of Legal Affairs. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very important institution in our state apparatus. This is where all transports are filed, all business names registered, all companies registered, all deeds registered, patent, trademark, copyright, etc., all registered there. With the increase in commercial activities, with the developmental trajectory of our country expanding, this agency has to play an improved and increased role. Mr. Speaker, they are pursuing several digital platforms to convert all their hard records to e-copy in almost every area so that members of the public can get e-copies of documents requested. Mr. Speaker, we are also digitizing the property records, and we are building a new edifice at Sodi on the Essequibo coast, a 4-story edifice to the value of about $500 million that will house a new facility, a new branch of this office for Essequibo. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Mr. Ford spoke at length about the criminal justice project. Clearly, this fellow doesn't understand. He doesn't know about the project. When we took government, Mr. Speaker, I was summoned to an emergency meeting by the IDB, the funding agency, and I was told that if this project doesn't get a kickstart, if it is not invigorated with energy, they will shut it down because it was suffering from inertia and inactivity. It was a dormant project under their government. Mr. Speaker, we took it, and if you look at the newspapers today, you will see advertised by the University of Guyana an invitation for persons possessing of an LLB degree to make an application to join a prosecutorial course that will be done at the University of Guyana. That the graduates of that program will be infused into our magistrates court, and they'll be prosecuting in the magistrates court along with our police prosecutor. Mr. Speaker, we intend under this program also to donate a quantity of computer and printers to the police force with a view of them being used to type statements that are required to be served in criminal proceedings. Right now, those statements are served in handwriting, and we intend to change that, Mr. Speaker. And there are a host of important initiatives that I'll have to speak at a different forum on in relation to this project. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, this year the government will kickstart the constitutional reform process. The budget has some $125 million. My honorable member and friend, Mr. Ramjatan, is in the committee with me. The committee has started to work, and we are looking at a model, a work plan that we will use to push the agenda of that process. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this is a visionary budget. This is a budget, as I said, that will lay the foundation for a better Guyana. This is a budget that I feel blessed to be part of. This is a budget that future generations will salute as the foundational pillar of modern Guyana. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, 2022 has started off and will no doubt be a fantastic year for Guyana. And as a sign as to the trajectory of where we're headed, I first want to take this opportunity to commend my friend and colleague across the aisle, Honorable Dr. Ashley Singh, and the hardworking staff of the Ministry of Finance and all the ministries for putting together not one, not two, but 3 budgets before the conclusion of their second year in office. And Mr. Speaker, I will say this, that before I use any names in my budget speech, I would have solicited the requisite permission, and I've been granted same by the persons of whom I will speak. The country's trajectory into the abyss was paused and halted on a fateful day in December of 2018 by none other than His Excellency, now His Excellency, Mr. Charandas Prasad. Had it not been for his actions, I think we would have seen a completely different society in Guyana, one that would have seen us maybe not only come to the brink of collapse, but we would have been firmly in the grip of a dictatorship. And I think that the nation owes my friend, I would say, a resounding gratitude and round of applause. Mr. Speaker, I quiver every time I think of where we would have been had it not been for his actions. I remember in 2016, the then government, pardon me, the then government had proposed what is now known as the cybercrime bill. And I do recall that the government said that they had a plan for a forward-looking Guyana, a green Guyana, save for the paint, of course. And I think one thing that may paraphrase the trajectory upon which Guyana was headed would be tremendous employment in this country. When I say employment, I think that a lot of Guyanese, and I say this, as I said earlier, I quiver every time I think of where we were headed. A tremendous amount of Guyanese would have been employed in building state penitentiaries and prisons. And why do I say that, Mr. Speaker? Looking at the economic performance of the previous administration, looking at the legislative agenda that was put forth, in that very cybercrime bill, they had injected a phrase to not only silent dissent, but also to lock up those people who were dissenting. Because in that bill was contained a small phrase, whereby if you disagreed with the government of the day, it was considered sedition. I was on the National Two Shows Council. I was the vice chair of the National Two Shows Council. And my honorable colleague here, who was the Minister of Home Affairs, came under fire from us at the NTC. Now imagine if the country was on that trajectory, going downhill into the abyss, and you spoke out and you said, let's find a way to correct this government. Half of this country would have been in jail. Mr. Speaker, when I say I quiver to think of where we would have gone, I don't say that with a light heart. I say that because I understand and I would have seen the trajectory that we were on. I want to thank the Honorable Charles Ramson, at least for giving me a segue into where we are and at least how I go forward. And I think I will borrow a part of his speech yesterday on the old maxim, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. And I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, these hands are clean. Whether I wash dishes or I bleach them, but I will tell you, these hands are clean. And Mr. Speaker, let me also say that I'm not going to regale you with a sonnet or a poem or a fantastic dream of whatever. Nor will I sing you a song. At least I'll save that torture of singing for some of my friends who can appreciate and maybe more so tolerate my singing. But I want to offer, I think many of my colleagues on both sides speak about the numbers. And I want to ensure that we understand the context of Budget 2022. And I use a childhood tale. I didn't say I wouldn't tell you a tale, but I'll use a childhood tale. When I was growing up in our little community of Pakuri in the 1970s, we never had cars. We only had one tractor. Vehicles used to come far and few in between. And we used to go and hide. In fact, we could hear the vehicle about 12 miles before they come in. But when the vehicle started to get close to the community, we'd all go and hide because we were not sure what their motives were, what their intentions were. But then the vehicles would get into the community, and we would all come out, at least seeing who's there. And when the vehicle started to drive, we would chase it. And when the vehicle stopped, we'd all stand there and watch in awe, gazing. We never knew how to drive. But I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, there's a fantastic thing about evolution. Not only can I drive a car, ride a bike, drive a boat, but I could also fly a plane. And times have most changed. But there is also another best friend, man's best friend determined, that does the same thing. They chase after a car, and when the car stops, they can't drive it. They'll never learn how to drive. They simply stand there and watch it, create a lot of noise around it, and then you start to drive and it goes the same way again. And I don't want to besmirch the character or characters of my colleagues on this side. But I will say this much, that akin to the behavior, not necessarily all of it, but akin to that behavior was a political party that chased that car for 23 years. And when they were finally given the car, they couldn't drive it. If there is anything that I say that is not factual, the interesting thing is the people in themselves would have seen that. They would have seen that. Honorable member, I said no such thing. Just to clarify, I'm simply contextualizing a behavior, a pattern of behavior. Mr. Speaker, I sat in my chair and listened to the Honorable Bishop Edgehill. And I may not be a theologian like he is, nor any of my colleagues who regularly quote the Bible, but I know one thing. And I think it is a common phrase. It says, where the leader or leaders are visionless, the people are lost. And I will take corrections if I would have misquoted. But Mr. Speaker, there's one thing that is so acutely absent in that phrase that no one ever cares to look at or to analyze. And what is completely absent from that phrase is what happens when a people have no leader. I will tell you what happened, Mr. Speaker. What happens is what happened at budget debates last year in this very House, and also repeated in December of 2021 in this very House. It is a listless, rudderless, I wouldn't use that term, my honorable friend, but a lot less of anything that one would expect from parliamentarians in this House. And I said it before and I will say it again. As parliamentarians, we have a moral and ethical obligation to ensure that we stand in the highest repute, because the public, at the end of the day, looks at us for guidance. Mr. Speaker, I have with me a copy of the Hansard from 2020. And one of the things that I said in that speech in 2020, and this once again is from the Hansard, it says whether it is the People's National Congress, PNC, or the PPP Civic in office, regardless of who sits in the big house, the government, at the end of the day, is the government. It is a superstructure that needs urgent recalibration in order to offer meaningful support to the indigenous peoples and all Guyanese. Whether I take credit or not, well, let's just say that I won't. But what I will say is that I'm happy to know that my words have not gone unheard. That the government took that initiative to recalibrate that superstructure and plan a delivery for the people as represented in Budget 2022. One of the things that people often say, Mr. Speaker, and I can't really name a single authority on this quote, but I know in Guyanese parlance it said, you have to give Jack his jacket. Mr. Speaker, I think I can't say I'm an authority on economics either. I merely took a couple of years course when I did my business diploma. But I remember reading about a quasi-philosopher / economist named Thomas Malthus, I think around 1796. And Malthus is known for a variety of things. One of them is the finite growth of population and the strife that humankind will endure to control that population. But in one of his papers, I can't recall the exact name, but I think he also spoke, and this was in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. He also spoke about the development of infrastructure to send the working class to work in workhouses. And in today's society, that is the equivalent of driving massive infrastructural development towards industrialization, towards a productive sector. And here we are, some 200 plus years after that learned gentleman put together that paper, that we are still struggling to see that come to life in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I said we have to give Jack his jacket. And at this juncture, I compliment the government for putting forth a very robust infrastructural development plan for Guyana. I say that because I understand, and my colleagues understand. And I say my colleagues, even though they sit on this side, they may look at me with, I'd say, some apprehension, but we all understand that in order to drive economic development in any country, you need a strong and vibrant infrastructural plan. Without roads, the largest economy in this world, the United States of America, would not have been that economic superpower. Without infrastructure, you'd find many European countries, many developed countries, not driving their economy. It is important that we contextualize the budget and its needs for today's society and for future growth, for what Guyana will be. Many times I hear Guyana referred to as the Dubai of South America, or it has the potential. But Dubai didn't transform overnight, not at a flip of a switch. It required responsible and responsive fiscal management, infrastructural development and planning, human capital, an economic plan. All of these things go hand in hand. So, Mr. Speaker, when people talk about us suffering to be the new Dubai, it didn't happen overnight. It takes time. And when I look at what it says on this budget proposed, at least the name, steadfast against all challenges, resolute in building our one Guyana. I look at it once again contextually. Where we started off, and I remember last year during budget debates, I think the Honorable Ashley Singh would have laid the groundwork for pulling the country back from the abyss, leveling it off, and now we have an opportunity to build upwards. And that, Mr. Speaker, when we say we have to give Jack key jacket, that is the direction that we have to look at. Maybe my colleagues will say I make a terrible opposition politician. I wouldn't disagree with that. But also, I remember during our campaign and politicking prior to 2020, one of the things that I said is that we practice adversarial politics instead of cooperational politics or cooperative politics. And if we look at what it says the cooperative, Mr. Speaker, and it's just behind you, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. It doesn't say the Combative Republic of Guyana. So when I stand here and I'm giving Jack key jacket, it is because Guyana needs all hands on deck. I cannot say that I came here to build a one Guyana, to help this country grow, but then I take those very same hands and words to use to tear the structures down. We have to operate from a position of logic, Mr. Speaker. We have to operate from a position of logic. Mr. Speaker, also accredited to the economist Thomas Malthus, Mr. Speaker, I hear some things in this House that I think before you can repaint a car, sometimes you have to use acid to strip away the paint. And sometimes that acid burns, but it's necessary and it's needed because of logic. But Malthus also spoke about, well, I wouldn't say he spoke, but there's also a theory about the Malthusian trap, about how human growth, if not managed properly, will outstrip its productive sector. And what in modern day term and context is now known, I guess since we have oil, is called the Dutch disease to a certain extent. And part of his advice of the day was to ensure governments understood that if the productive sector cannot function, the population will suffer. So when we look, once again, Mr. Speaker, to contextualize Budget 2022, it is framed in such a manner to avoid this country slipping into the Malthusian trap, what is now commonly known as the Dutch disease.
Of this Honourable House's consideration of Budget 2022. The first segment, of course, being the policy debate, and the second, which will commence next week, being consideration of the national estimates. Let me, at the very onset, express my deep gratitude to all of my colleagues on this side of the House, not least, of course, and perhaps foremost amongst whom, the Honourable Prime Minister, who spoke immediately before me, for the time they took to elaborate our government's program for advancing economic and social development in our country in this new and incredibly exciting era in Guyana's history. Let me also thank all those who spoke from the opposite side of the House for their contributions to this debate, which almost invariably served the important purpose of reminding the Guyanese people of the appropriateness of the judgment they exercised on the 2nd of March 2020. I wish, sir, in particular, to acknowledge the speech and contribution made by the Honourable former Leader of the Opposition, and I wish, sir, to join Prime Minister in acknowledging and thanking the former Leader of the Opposition for his service in this capacity. His hour-long presentation, sir, would have reminded us in this House and the world at large why, sir, his own members of Parliament brought to a premature end his service in government on the 21st of December 2018. It would be recalled, sir, that it was the government in which he played such an instrumental role, and I will come back to that role, that merely 3.5 years into their term of office, their own core of members of Parliament exercised the deliberate judgment that they should no longer be there. But if that premature termination of his tenure in government were not enough, On the 2nd of March 2020, and I will not speak of the 2 local government elections that took place in the intervening period.
16 and 18.
On the 2nd of March 2020, the people of Guyana spoke clearly and resoundingly to Mr. Harman, the Honourable Member Mr. Harman, and his government. Sir, if that were not enough, on the 18th of December 2021, the membership of his own party rejected him from the leadership of the party. And so small wonder, sir, that Mr. Harman chose today to deliver his swan song from the confines of some hidden room so that he could not face the indignity of the empty opposition benches, which would have demonstrated that his own members of parliament could not be bothered to be present when he was speaking.
Wow. No, that hurts. Please report that. That hurts.
Mr. Speaker, what a striking image it was. This lone figure standing all alone in a room by himself. Standing all alone in a room by himself.
God is even with you.
A man who once bestrode Guyana like the de facto emperor.
You need God more than a lot of people.
A man who once bestrode the length and breadth of Guyana as the emperor at large and the self-appointed emperor for life. Unless there be any mistake, sir, the person who was supposed to have been his boss had already assumed almost divine proportions.
Yep.
So one of the most striking images of the 2015 to 2020 period, one of the images that will forever be etched in the memories of the Guyanese people and in the annals of political history of this country, is the image of a cardboard cutout positioned in the middle of the National Stadium because the great and divine leader was too good to be amongst his supplicants. So if you wanted to pose with the president, you had to come and line up to stand up near the cardboard man. Sir, and that image will live forever. And you wonder, sir, why the people of Guyana rejected you? You wonder why the people of Guyana rejected you? Sir, this great and divine leader to whom the emperor at large reported for 5 years, only condescended to speak. They speak about democracy, openness, and transparency. Today, Mr. Harman spoke disparagingly about the Vice President giving a press conference. Sir, the Vice President and His Excellency the President, the Prime Minister, and all the ministers of this government, all the ministers of this government speak almost every week to the media. But the cardboard man, sir, only condescended on 3 occasions in 5 years. The cardboard man only condescended to speak to the media on 3 occasions in 5 years. And you dare to come to speak about the People's Progressive Party and our commitment to openness and transparency and good governance. You have the audacity You have the audacity, you and your cardboard leader, you and your cardboard leader have the audacity. You have the audacity to speak about openness and transparency and good governance. A cardboard leader that refused to answer questions from the media that were not scripted. The media used to be told, y'all jumping, you like to talk about Jagdev and Ali, but you don't want to hear about Granger, the cardboard man. You don't want to hear about Granger, the cardboard cutout. You don't want to hear about the cardboard cutout. You like jump up and talk about Granger and Ali. Listen and hear about the cardboard cutout. Cardboard cutout president. Cardboard man.
But Honorable Minister, His Excellency is not here to defend himself.
My apologies, sir. I was referring to a cardboard cutout. Sir.
Party disrespecting, they got rid of him as the leader.
Sir.
They didn't even give me a nomination.
Sir, the people of Guyana, let me say this, sir. This is not 1972. It's not 1982. It's 2022. And the people of Guyana are watching and listening. And they are far more informed than the APNU AFC members of parliament would like to give them credit for. Far better informed. You want to talk about dictatorship, sir? My apologies, sir. My colleagues on that side of the house, simple things say a lot. Simple things. Whole week we heard about the 3 Bs. Oh, it's 5, no? Books, book bag, something about book bag and boots. Book bag and boots and boat and bus.
And Brian Tiwari.
Sir,
And Brian Tiwari.
Sir, let me just give a simple example. You know the buses that they're boasting of. Were all painted green and yellow, and they had emblazoned on them, even the boats. So the boats were all called the David G. And the buses were all called the David G buses.
Yeah, the G stand for God.
Cardboard man that you all reject. Y'all didn't even nominate the man to be a member of the executive council of the party and were jumping up but distinguished. He wasn't distinguished enough to be a member of the executive of the party. You're jumping now over distinguished. His own party rejected him.
Amen.
You're jumping now. His own party didn't consider him worthy of a nomination to any office in the executive. And jumping now but distinguished. Sir, these buses and boats were painted David G. David G. Mr. Speaker, I just have to give a simple example. Can you imagine what their response would be if we started launching buses and boats called the Irfane? Can you imagine if we started launching buses and boats called the Irfane or the Baraje? Can you imagine? But the hypocrisy and double standards right there in that issue captures the essence of what the APNU AFC is all about. Right there. It's fine for these buses to be emblazoned green and yellow and for them to be called David J, David G. They might as well paint them, should have called them cardboard M. It's fine for them to be called David G. But you imagine the calumny that would be visited upon a bus or a boat called the Irfan A or the Bara J. You imagine, just imagine. And they see nothing wrong with that, sir. That for them is good governance. And they believe that the Guyanese people are not watching and are not listening. But this is not 1972 or 1982. I ain't start talk about the exercise book with the picture. I ain't start talking about Melanie Damishana or Roxanne Burnham Gardens or Linden. You imagine if we found Silicon. Mind you, His Excellency, I'm not sure if he was Prime Minister or President at the time, but Mr. Burnham, whether he was President or Prime Minister at the time, was still incumbent when Linden was called Linden. You imagine if we found Silica City and call it Irfanville? It's the direct parallel. Mr. Burnham was the sitting Prime Minister or President, I suspect Prime Minister. When Mackenzie and Wismar were linked, and a new town was founded, I believe he would have been Prime Minister. This was prior to his assumption of the executive presidency. Sir, he was sitting Prime Minister, and a new town was formed. And the new town was called Linden. It's like if we go and call Silica City, Mark Phillipsville, or Jagdaleville. Oh. Sir, that is the nature. That is the nature. That's the nature of the PNC. That's the nature of the PNC, sir. And they see nothing wrong. They see nothing wrong with that. And they have the audacity, sir. They have the audacity to come here and watch the Guyanese people in their eyes and in their faces and pontificate about good governance and about democracy and about constitutional rule. But this, sir, is not 1972 or 82. It's 2022. And on that note, I want to say the following. The honorable member, Mr. Harman's performance today was not an outlier. It wasn't an isolated exception or an anomaly relative to the performance of those on the other side. In fact, it was very characteristic. It was very characteristic of the presentations we received from all of our colleagues on that side of the House. And of course, this should not come as a surprise, because the PNC has never really changed its intrinsic and fundamental nature. Whether, on a previous occasion I had spoken about their successive name changes, which do not disguise the fundamental consistency of their nature. With this, for example, all of this jumping up about appointment of commission that Mr. Harman went off on, Mr. Speaker, one of the most important constitutional offices in this country is the office of Leader of the Opposition. On Monday, sir, we heard that the Leader of the Opposition, on Monday that we heard that the Leader of the Opposition had resigned. On Monday, sir, in fact, it was budget day. It was January 26th, budget day, that we heard that the Leader of the Opposition had resigned. Clear and definitive, whether resigned, forced to resign, whatever it was. We heard that the Leader of the Opposition had resigned. A day or two ago, we heard that Ms. Nicolette Henry had resigned. Whether she has or has not is apparently still a mystery. But, sir, there's been no move to fill the position of Leader of the Opposition. A critical, instead we had a lame duck, has been former Leader of the Opposition coming to pontificate today. From a hidden room. Unsupported by his own MPs, rejected by his own MPs. Sir, rumor has it, and I don't wish to be a rumor monger, but given the gravity of the matter, rumor has it that the cardboard man is planning a commission of inquiry. You know, he liked commissions of inquiry. That is why he spent 5 years doing commission of inquiry. The cardboard man apparently is causing a commission of inquiry into whether Mr. Norton is fit and proper. You remember that phrase? Fit and proper? Apparently, a commission of inquiry is planned on whether Mr. Norton is fit and proper to be leader of the opposition. They're going to do a position paper before they get to the white paper and then the green paper. Sir, and this is perhaps understandable, because one of the apparent lead contenders for the position, or lead aspirants for the position of leader of the opposition, is on public record as describing Mr. Norton as racist. And sir, I'm going to go one step further, Honorable Prime Minister, with your permission, sir. I'm going to go further. The Honorable Prime Minister didn't name the members involved, but I'm reading here an article that says Roysdale Ford supports Harman for PNCR leadership. And the article says that prominent attorney at law, Roysdale Ford, I should have inserted the appropriate correct qualifier. I am quoting from the article. Attorney at law described in this article as prominent. Thursday night came out with a ringing endorsement of Mr. Harman for the leadership of their People's National Congress reform. And this is the very democracy. Don't let me tell you what Carl Greenwich said about your internal party democracy. Carl still vexed. He said on public record that the party Rabi, that is on public record, don't have a party democracy. You want me to quote Carl Greenwich? You want me to quote Carl Greenwich? Sir, Mr. Ford, the honorable member, is quoted as saying here, there was no place for a tribal or divisive leader. What? And there was no doubt about who he was referring to, because promptly the next day, none other than Mr. Aubrey Norton himself pens a letter, a public letter. And hear what he says. His words, sir, Mr. Norton's words, not mine. I find it laughable but mischievous that Mr. Roysdale Ford insinuated that the PNCR under my leadership will turn the party into a black party. Mr. Ford is too new to the PNC to know. In other words, he's a Johnny come lately. I believe he probably does say that. Sir, these are not my words. These are not my words, sir. They are the words of Mr. Ford himself, who came today and with a lot of drama, hysterics, and empty theatrics, and histrionics even, appeared to be submitting an application for the job. So, I don't know, Mr. Norton, if you will have to wait for 5 months, like how Mr. Irfan Ali had to wait for 5 months. But brace yourself. Brace yourself. Because the country had to wait from December 2018 to March 2020.
Yes.
And the country then had to wait from March 2020 to August 2020. So Aubrey, brace yourself, my brother. Brace yourself. You're in for the long haul.
And I can't wait. Brace yourself, Aubrey. Till next Congress. I can't wait. Because when it's coming in, it's gonna be licked like peas. Turkey feather. Brace yourself. It's gonna be licked like peas.
So, sir, when our colleagues on that side of the house come with their contributions, and I'm looking here, sir, when they come to this budget debate with their contributions, and they use, and I see the Honorable Chief Whip on the other side is here, he used the word, I believe that he said the budget is disrespectful. That's his word. Sir, contribution after contribution, the APNU AFC sought to insult the intelligence of the Guyanese people, disrespecting them. The real disrespect came from the APNU AFC. Looking at a budget that includes a lengthy number of interventions that will dramatically transform Guyana, that will materially and directly improve people's lives, and they still stand up and believe that the people of Guyana are incapable of interpreting and processing things for themselves. And barefacedly sought to insinuate otherwise to the people of Guyana. I want to say this, sir. In 2022, in the information age, or even the post-information age, in an age where people have access to the vastness of the World Wide Web, there is immediacy of communication. There is ability to process like never before. The people of Guyana are capable of judging for themselves. And you know, our country is maturing. It's maturing. We are maturing as a country. For 28 years, we were in a dictatorship from 1964 to 1992. In 1992, we were finally able to break out of the stranglehold of this oppressive dictatorship with the restoration of democracy. The People's Progressive Party was in government for 23 years to 2015. And perhaps understandably, some people started to have faded memories of what it was like to live under the PNC. Some started, their memories started to fade, as memories will do over time. This will happen to all of us. This will happen to all of us. Some people's memories started to fade. A whole new generation of young voters were born and grew up and came of age. Didn't know the pre-1992 period. Didn't understand when you speak about rigging of election, when you speak of destruction of the economy, when you speak of dictatorship, when you speak of economic collapse, when you speak of banning of basic food items. This was not relatable to them, because all they knew was the freedoms that they enjoyed in the post-1992 era. And so perhaps understandably in 2015, there were a number of people who figured perhaps it's time, maybe it's time, we give these other guys a chance. Mind you, there are some who, in fact, will dispute on very credible grounds the basis on which they claimed victory. But put that aside for the moment. Put that aside for the moment. They assumed office in 2015. Sir, it only took them 3 years, and indeed less. It only took them 3 years for the people of Guyana to say, you know what? I know what it is like to live in a PPP, or in an environment where in a Guyana where there's a PPP government. I know what it is like to live in a Guyana where there is a PNC government. And it took the Guyanese people only 3 years of tasting the bitter medicine of the APNU, AFC and government for them to say, out you go, out you go. Give me back the PPP. They may not be perfect, but they're far better than y'all. Bring back the PPP. It only took the people of Guyana 3 years or less to figure that out. Sir, over the last week, and I want to say, sir, at this point in Guyana's history, and in this modern, as I was saying a few minutes ago, in this modern age of information, in this modern age of information, in this era when Guyana is going through such a rapid and dramatic transformation, sir, what we need more than ever before is serious, credible, capable, and competent government.